What's up, Outliers? Welcome to another episode of Performance Bites for bite-sized insights on complex subjects in health and performance. Today, we're going to talk about creatine. Creatine is the most studied sports performance supplement that is out there. We're going to kind of go over what creatine really is and then also how to use it, things to know about it, just, the inner workings, and also kind of, some stuff that maybe will help you feel more comfortable taking it. Because the biggest thing with creatine is it kind of gets a negative rap, just like about how it works in the body, what it can do to the body. I'm going to start this off by saying that it is very safe to take. Long-term wise, short-term wise, it's a very safe supplement to take. But there is a myth around it being harmful to the kidneys. So I'm just going to kind of nip that in the bud right now and say that if you're a healthy individual and don't have any pre-existing kidney issues, creatine is going to be perfectly safe. If you deal with issues with your kidneys, then it's maybe a good idea to go talk to your health care professional before taking creatine. However, otherwise, for the majority of people, creatine is very, very safe. So what is creatine? Creatine is something that occurs naturally in the body already. Our liver, kidney, and pancreas actually produce creatine, but we also get creatine through sources like red meat and fish. So the creatine that we're producing typically isn't a large amount. So the majority of the creatine that we need for our muscles is going to actually need to be taken in through nutrition or through supplementation. It's really important to note that nutrition does come first before supplements. Supplement is supplementing something. But with creatine, a good example of this is for 1 gram of creatine, you need to eat half a pound of beef or pork or fish. So it's kind of hefty for 1 gram. And the general recommended dose for somebody like my size, I weigh about 165 to 170 fluctuating, is going to be about 5 grams of intake per day of supplementing. So if I was to just eat that, I'd be eating 2.5 pounds of red meat a day, which I probably could do. I'm not going to put it past myself to do that. But realistically speaking, from a place of just feeling totally full from that much protein and fat, probably better that I just use a supplement of the creatine. Now, how does it really work in the body is kind of the big thing that I think is really important to understand, because people just think, I take creatine, I get bigger, I get stronger. Couldn't be true, but it also cannot be true in the sense of getting bigger. You don't have to get bigger if you're taking creatine. I think that's probably one of the bigger things that like action sports athletes, motocross athletes avoid so much with creatine is they won't want to get bigger, heavier. So once again, this goes into the category of like surplus load of calories compared to calories burned to actually get bigger. But if you're just taking creatine as a sports performance supplement, it's not going to necessarily make you bigger. It might make you retain a little bit of more water than you're used to, which can add up to maybe an extra pound, maybe 2. And that's very minimal and not guaranteed either because it reacts differently for everyone. So big thing with it is we store the majority of creatine in the skeletal muscle, and we store it as phosphocreatine, so phosphate with the creatine. And that's about 95% of our creatine goes into our muscles. Now, it's really important to note that it needs to be where it's going to get used. So it's going to get used in the muscles because it's going to actually help with our ATP. So ATP is adenosine triphosphate. It is our main currency of energy in the body. The mitochondria produce it through energy, through carbohydrates, fats, and sometimes even proteins. But that's a whole other category of things. But essentially what creatine or that phosphocreatine in our muscles is going to do is when we're doing rapid energy loss or, lifting heavy, running fast, even running slow, we're going to be using ATP. So when the ATP breaks off a phosphate, it goes from adenosine triphosphate and breaks into adenosine diphosphate. So from 3 phosphates down to 2 phosphates. what's nice is when we store that creatine in our muscle, it's stored as that phosphocreatine. So it will actually take that phosphate off the creatine and give it back to the ATP or the ADP to create more ATP, which then can create more energy use. So it's kind of a neat little thing, some chemistry in there down in our physiology that is happening to help us produce energy and keep us producing energy so that we don't just like fall flat on our face. Very important thing there. So with creatine, the most studied version of it is going to be creatine monohydrate. There are other types of creatine. There, in my opinion, as a coach, I'm going to most likely just say, hey, just take creatine monohydrate. It's the most studied, it's safe, and it's also very bioavailable, meaning that it's going to be uptaken into the body a lot better than something like a creatine ethyl ester, which is not very bioavailable. So the thing about these other ones is they're basically just different compounds attached to the creatines. Like the creatine has a monohydrate or an ethyl ester or, stuff like that attached, which then kind of changes its pathways a little bit. The monohydrate kind of speaks for itself, one, water attached. So it's going to pull water into the cell. So it is going to make some more water retention, but it actually is really hydrating the cells, which can be super helpful for athletic performance. But with that being said, it is important to make sure that you're drinking adequate water to make sure that you're actually, replenishing that in other parts of your body if it's pulling it into the cells. So an example of this is if you take creatine monohydrate and you aren't drinking enough water, you might get some GI distress because it's extracting a little too much water from the digestive system. And that's not guaranteed, but it's always good to make sure that you're drinking enough water if you're performing as an athlete or, even just trying to be healthy individual, period. So drinking enough water is important in this whole talk about creatine, but making sure that you're taking the right dose is really important. So I kind of mentioned already about the 5 grams. That's for somebody my size. So 160 plus, let's call it. If you're less than 160, you can start to taper down your intake a little bit. So if you weigh $120, maybe instead of taking 5 grams, you're going to cut that down to maybe 3 grams and so forth. And it's important to note that you can kind of play with it too, because even myself taking creatine for many years now, I've gone through phases where I'm really loading heavy, making sure I'm getting my 5 grams in every scoop. And then sometimes I'll reduce that down to maybe, 3.5, which is not fully measured per se. I'm just not taking a full heaping scoop, but I'm just taking a little bit less. And that just kind of depends on where I'm at within my training, what I'm trying to accomplish within my training, and how I'm feeling too. Sometimes I might be feeling like I just need a little bit less in me. It's kind of like an intuitive thing. But for starters, it really is totally fine to just be like, hey, I weigh this much, 5 grams probably going to be, a good take or less. This information is very available online. So if you're unsure about how much to take, just simply go online and see how much you should take or talk to a nutritionist about that. So the big thing with creatine is it's old news that you need to do a loading phase with it. So it used to be something of the sort where you take about 20 grams for about a week to 2 weeks, and we call that like a loading phase. So that loading phase would saturate your muscle very quickly with high amounts of creatine. So you basically fill up your cup very quick. That method tends to be what most people experience GI distress with, because it's, as I said, it's taking a lot of fluid out of the digestive system and pulling it into the cells, which then can cause that distress, the cramping, the bloating, and stuff like that. So it's important to note that though that loading method is still a valid way of doing it, you don't have to do it that way. You can simply take your 3 to 5 grams, whatever it is, per day, like a daily vitamin, and let that fill up your cup just a little bit slowly. It's likely going to take about a month for you to fully saturate your tissue with the creatine, but you're not going to experience that discomfort, or you're much less likely to experience that discomfort within, the digestive system and stuff like that, because you're just doing it in a lower amount. And that lower amount can be done for long, long periods of time. Like I said, the research around it proves that it's very safe to take on long-term portions. So, if you experience any discomforts, just remove it, see how you feel from it, and then maybe reintroduce it at a lower amount, whatever it might be. But it is really important to, just kind of feel your body out, just like with anything. Like if you're introducing like a new food into your regimen, you're going to kind of see how it makes you feel. You're going to make adjustments based upon how you're feeling. So no different than that. Now, getting into the benefits of it, I think this is probably one of the most important. It's pretty important. So one of the most common things is increased strength and power, because you're getting that higher amount of the phosphocreatine into the muscle. And ATP is burned very rapidly when you're moving quick or very heavy weight, essentially. So that creatine level can really be beneficial for it. Now, it's been thought for a very long time that, okay, that's great for a strength power athlete, but what about an endurance athlete? So it's actually been researched now that it's very beneficial for an endurance athlete as well, because when you're running a marathon, for example, you might not be moving at your fastest that you're capable of, but your body needs everything that it can to be on deck for use. So why not saturate the tissue with extra creatine so that when you are running, you're keeping your explosive power later into your runs and stuff like that? Or, if you're an endurance athlete through, cycling, mountain biking, motocross, stuff like that, still very valuable. Not to mention, it's still going to basically elevate your athletic performance, even if you don't really fully train to be power or strength. It's just going to be something that's going to help you be a better athlete. It's going to help you recover. That's another big benefit of it, is the recovery side of things. So essentially, that faster recovery is going to come from reduced inflammation, because you're just not tearing stuff up quite as much, because you have more energy, less protein breakdown. And that's great, because when we're training, we're using carbohydrates and fats primarily, but we do use some protein as energy. It's not great if you get into a zone where you totally lose your carbohydrate and glycogen store, and then you start to burn more of your muscle tissue. That's pretty problematic long-term wise, but it still happens at a small level. Example, if I go out for a run, call it just like a pretty mid-range run for about an hour, I'm going to burn primarily carbohydrate probably. Second to that is going to be fat, maybe like call it a 50% carbohydrate of 45% fat, and I might burn a couple percentages of protein within that. That's just how it's gonna work, just because the body is going to use what it needs in that moment. So if we have creatine in the system, though, we're going to reduce that chance of the protein, which is great, because that's less muscle breakdown, and it's also less the body has to do to repair the muscle to be ready for the next day of training or next day of competition. So that's pretty solid. The big thing that I personally love about creatine is the cognitive benefits. This is newer research, but that saturation that we get in our tissues also happens in our brain. And creatine really helps with our cognitive ability, whether it's from a place of focus, a place of memory. It's super nice because it's basically building up that concentration to be higher in that area in our brain. So that's maybe a little bit past my expertise on as far as how much is going on in there, but it's very well researched and also anecdotal, of course, because I'm telling you this as things that I notice. But it's been something that when I take my creatine, I've noticed very much that I can sit down, focus, and work a lot better, have better ideas, stay locked in for longer without being so distracted. And then when I don't take it, because I will kind of take it for, or not take it for a week or so sometimes, just to kind of test it just to see what's happening, making sure it's still doing its thing. And I can definitely tell from a cognitive place that there's a big difference, which then that gets into if you're an action sports athlete or just an athlete in general, and you're taking creatine. Creatine is actually a part of my concussion protocol. So if I have an athlete that gets a concussion, creatine goes into the regimen. Likely they're already taking it on a maintenance dose of that 3 to 5 grams, but we would boost it up quite a bit, even in that situation of a concussion, because it has shown to be helpful with recovery of concussion because of its cognitive benefits, essentially. So who should take creatine is kind of the last thing I want to go over. Honestly, everyone and anyone is going to be pretty good. Obviously, if you're a younger athlete, I definitely recommend talking with your parents and then also talking with a coach if that should be something you should be looking into. But younger teens, there is evidence around it being beneficial for them for their growth, helping with their bones, helping with their muscles developing and stuff like that, especially if they're training for sport. Creatine for the everyday athlete, great. Creatine for high performance professional athletes, great. And then creatine for people of older ages, even better. Big reason why is because as we age, we tend to lose muscle naturally. It's just what happens. So if you can increase your muscle or help retain your muscle later in life, that's going to help increase your lifespan. So keeping that muscle, very important. Helping that muscle through nutrition, helping that muscle through supplementation like creatine is going to be wonderful. So like I said, it's going to be great for everyone. If you have any pre-existing issues, do seek more professional advice if that's something that you should be doing, especially if it's something related to kidneys. But otherwise, very, very safe supplement, the most researched supplement for sport that is out there, hands down. Highly recommend it. And if you have more questions about this, you're not quite sure, if it's for you or something like that, shoot me a message. Super happy to talk with you about it. But at the same time, I really just want this to come across as, valuable information that everyone that listens and watches this can essentially, make a decision for themselves. So super stoked on it. I take creatine every day. Like I said, I've taken it for many, many years, and it's without a doubt my favorite supplement that helps me feel better, helps me think better, and also helps with my recovery. So couldn't recommend it anymore. So if you are looking for a good brand, there's a lot of them out there. Just make sure that you're going after something that has been, tested, because creatine becoming so popular, it is manufactured at a high rate now. So you just want to make sure that you stay away from, contaminated models, but also making sure that it is exactly what it is. There's some really good brands out there. Not hard to find them. I don't have any affiliation with creatine right now, so not going to plug anything. But as time goes on, hopefully I get something and I'll give it to you guys and make sure that you can, get a good product. With that being said, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, share, comment, all that good stuff. Helps grow all this stuff. This is the first post that is going to be basically a mixture between my Spotify and the podcast and YouTube. So please give us some support so we can keep growing. I'll see you in the next one.